The tears didn't come when his lips touched mine. They came later, after his touch had faded from my skin, after the silence settled back into the room. And there I was, lying exposed and speechless, uncertain whether I had just shattered or been reborn. Throughout that entire night, my name never passed his lips. Yet every gesture left something indelible within me, and I emerged completely transformed. If this resonates with you already, please like this video. And if you believe love can spark in the most unlikely moments, subscribe for more tales that linger long after the final sentence. Ask me to describe the scent of a promise, and I'd say it carries notes of cinnamon and aged parchment. In our kitchen sits a wooden container. Nothing elaborate, just weathered pine with a brass clasp and a faded tulip design on top. It once belonged to my dad. Inside, he stored receipts, loose buttons, and countless letters he lacked the courage to mail. I was 8 when I discovered it initially. I recall being struck by how much weight a simple piece of paper could carry when you knew it was intended for someone who might never see it. This morning, that container sat open on our kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the glass, casting gentle rays across the pile of correspondence. Beyond the window, snow had begun falling once more, the delicate kind that refuses to settle. It simply dances through the atmosphere as if recalling something precious. I was adding honey to my tea when the telephone rang. Not our home line, but the mobile. The one we only charge for urgent situations. Miss Emma Carter. A crisp masculine voice, professional, sharp like a suit pressed with too much force. My name is Thomas Lynn. I'm calling for Mr. Nathaniel Anderson. He wishes to meet with you today if you're available. I paused, confused. I'm sorry, what? I'm certain the name rings a bell. Your father was once employed by the Anderson family. Mr. Anderson has inherited something connected to your father's affairs, something personal. By 3 p.m., I stood 31 stories above Manhattan, in an office so polished it resembled an art gallery more than a place where multi-million-dollar decisions were made. Nathaniel Anderson remained seated when I entered. He simply glanced up from the window he'd been studying and remarked, "You resemble him." I wanted to ask whether he meant my father or someone else, but I remained quiet. He gestured toward the chair facing his desk. I sat down, knees pressed together, hands folded, attempting to appear smaller than I felt. "I won't waste your time," he stated. His voice was deep, steady, as if it had been carved into him years ago and never altered since. "There's an issue between our families that requires resolution. Your father owed mine a debt." I blinked hard. "With all due respect, Mr. Anderson, my father passed away 5 years ago, and he was a tailor, not a gambler." Nathaniel pushed a folder across his desk. Inside lay a contract, dense legal language heavy with implications, and tucked alongside it a letter. My breathing stopped. "I believe this is yours." I accepted the letter with shaking hands. The paper was old, yet well preserved, creased from multiple readings. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's. I recognized it immediately. Those careful strokes, his tendency to underline words he thought might be overlooked. But this letter shouldn't exist here. It was the one he composed the day after the accident when Mr. Anderson Sr. fell from his horse on the icy path behind our town. My father had been present. He pulled the man from the ravine and carried him 3 miles to safety. It was never meant for public eyes, just a quiet note of gratitude. I discovered it among my father's belongings after his death, Nathaniel explained. But someone else had mailed it years earlier. A copy. It wasn't intended for me, I believe, but it revealed enough. The words blurred as I read them again to Henry Anderson. "There are debts a man can settle with money, but what you provided me that day, trust, employment, Food for my table when I had nothing that cannot be repaid in this lifetime, but I will pass it forward. That's all I can offer. Samuel Carter Nathaniel clasped his hands together. I'm not requesting money. I'm asking for something only you can provide. There was a lengthy pause before he added, almost clinically, marry me. I laughed. Not from amusement, but because it seemed like the only logical response. He didn't react. This isn't a romantic proposal, Miss Carter. This is about legacy, about appearances. The Anderson name has always represented loyalty, quiet, unsentimental honor. I intend to preserve that. My heart raced. Why me? Because you are your father's daughter? And because in 12 months you can walk away with everything resolved. No commitments. I'll handle your mother's medical expenses. I'll ensure your brother completes his education. I won't touch you, not unless you want me to. But I need a Carter standing beside me. Someone who understands what a vow costs. I should have left immediately. I told myself to do exactly that. But then I thought about Mom, how she attempted to hide the trembling in her hands last week while slicing apples for pie, the outstanding medical bills, and how my father always said, there are debts you don't avoid, Emma, not the ones that define your reputation. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady. I'll need one night to consider. Nathaniel nodded. You have until morning. After that, the offer expires. I turned toward the elevator. The steel doors gleamed like mirrors. My reflection appeared older than it had that morning, like someone who'd aged 10 years since breakfast. That evening, I returned home and opened the pine container again. The original letter remained inside. 2 copies, 2 lives, 1 promised dot at 6:12. The following morning, I returned to the tower. I wore my Sunday dress. I pulled my hair back the way Mama used to when she meant business. I entered Nathaniel's office, picked up the pen he placed beside the contract, and signed my name. I'm not doing this for you, I said. I'm doing it for the man who taught me what a good reputation is worth. He didn't smile, but something in his expression shifted. Almost imperceptibly, I departed that office with a ring in a velvet box and a calendar date confirmed. No music, no flowers, no fairy tale. Just a girl with her father's surname walking into a marriage built on silence, legacy, and a letter that should never have been sent. The house didn't feel like a home. It emerged from the Vermont forest like a fortress. Stone walls, steep roof lines, as if designed to weather storms that hadn't occurred in centuries. Snow clung to the gutters. The long, winding driveway offered no apology for how unwelcoming it felt. The driver spoke little, only nodding. When I thanked him before stepping out, my boots sank slightly into the fresh snow, and my breath created fog as I stood before the front doors. Wondering what I was doing, it had only been 4 days since I signed that document. A paper that somehow connected me to a stranger whose expression hadn't changed once during our initial meeting. 4 days since I looked my mother in the eye and told her I was going away for work. I didn't mention I was getting married next week. I didn't tell anyone. Inside, the warmth was immediate but impersonal, as if the heat was intended for the furniture, not the people. The entrance opened into a vast hall with polished wood floors, high ceilings, and hushed corners. My heels clicked softly as I followed the butler. Yes, there was an actual butler named James, through a series of rooms that looked like magazine layouts no one had dared to inhabit. Then he left me just like that. No welcome, no directions. I wandered into what appeared to be a sitting room. Bookshelves lined the walls. There was an unused fireplace and a grand piano under a sheet. But it was the photograph on the mantel that stopped me. I moved closer, fingers instinctively reaching toward the wooden frame. My father, young, perhaps 25, standing beside another man taller, broader-shouldered. but with the same quiet kindness in his eyes. Nathaniel's father, they were smiling. Not politely, not like business associates, but like people who'd shared hardship together. The fire didn't crackle behind me, but something did. A footstep. You knew, I said without turning. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that my father worked for yours, that they were friends. I didn't know until I found the letter, he replied, but you kept this. He entered the room. The air shifted with him, not heavy but deliberate, like he understood how to occupy space. I kept it, he said, because it reminded me that my father was capable of trusting someone. There was a moment of silence, and then not because of the dad. He shook his head. No, that came later. I sat partly because my legs felt unsteady, partly because it gave me an excuse not to look at him directly. He remained standing, always slightly taller than necessary, always precise. I need to make something clear, I said softly but firmly. I'm not performing a role for your board of directors or your publicist or whatever PR scheme this is. He looked almost amused. There's no scheme. I don't do publicity, and my board doesn't care who I marry as long as I sign checks promptly. Then why me? His response came too quickly. Because no one else would understand why it matters. I looked up then for the first time, really looked. His features were sharp, yes, but weary, like someone who hadn't rested in a long time. There's a chapel down the road, he said. I've reserved it for next Thursday, small, private. You'll have everything you need, clothing, paperwork. You just have to appear. What if I change my mind? A pause. You won't. Later that evening, I explored the guest wing I was assigned to. It was twice the size of our entire house back home. There was a fireplace with flames flickering quietly, a writing desk made of dark walnut, a walk-in closet lined with dresses and shades I'd never owned. Silk, cashmere, lace each one selected without asking my preferences. On the bed was a card. No note inside, just a schedule for the wedding day. Everything printed, impersonal, immaculate. My throat tightened. This wasn't what marriage looked like in the stories Mama used to read aloud. It wasn't love or partnership or even companionship. It was paperwork, punctuality, polished silver, and polite indifference. Before bed, I took a walk outside. Snow had stopped falling. The air was sharp but not harsh. I found a bench at the edge of the garden, or what would be a garden if it weren't buried under white. I sat, wrapped my coat tighter, and stared at the trees. That's when I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. He didn't speak, just sat at the other end of the bench, enough space between us to remain strangers. I hated this house, he said after a while. When I was a boy, too many locked doors. Still feels that way, I replied, surprised at my own boldness, a ghost of a smile. It hasn't changed much. Why live here then? Because it's the only place that remembers who my father was. I turned to look at him. And what about who you are? His jaw shifted just slightly. I'm someone who doesn't believe in second chances. We sat in silence, and I thought about my mother, hands wrapped around a warm teacup, humming while the snow fell outside our kitchen window. I thought about my father sewing in the glow of lamplight, mending other people's clothes with care he never spared for his own. And then I looked at the man beside me, alone in his own legacy. I didn't know if I pitied him or understood him. Maybe both. When we stood to leave, our hands brushed accidentally. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. Something passed between us. Not warmth, not yet, but recognition. A soft, wordless truth. We were both here because of men who kept their promises. And now we would keep ours. There are sounds you don't forget. The rattle in a mother's breath when she is too proud to say she's in pain. The hush of a nurse trying not to alarm you. Mechanical beep of a heart monitor trying to convince you everything is fine. That morning, I heard all of them at once. I wasn't supposed to be in town. I had told the Anderson staff I needed a few days before the wedding to adjust, I said. But the truth was, my mother's voice had trembled on the phone the night before, and I couldn't ignore it, so I borrowed a car, drove 3 hours through freezing rain, pulled into the hospital parking lot with coffee gone cold and hands gone numb. Room 204, respiratory ward. My brother Matthew was sitting in a chair beside her bed, clutching a book he wasn't reading. "She didn't want me to call you," he said, not looking up. Mama was asleep, pale, too still. "She's getting worse," he added, his voice low. I sat beside him, took the book from his hands, held his fingers in mine like Mama used to do when we were little. Then I noticed the file at the foot of the bed, medical charts, treatment records, a long list of recent procedures and updated prescriptions, and a signature at the bottom of the billing sheet, N. Anderson. I didn't tell Matthew. I didn't say a word to the doctors. I just walked out of that room and into the hallway, my ears ringing with disbelief. He paid not just for the medications, for everything. Weeks of inpatient care, blood tests, consultations, all under an alias I hadn't known existed until that moment. I called the number on the card James had given me back at the house. The butler, always composed, always unreadable. "This is Emma Carter," I said. "Please tell Mr. Anderson thank you." A pause. "Then I will relay the message." I hung up without waiting for more. Mama woke up a few hours later. She smiled when she saw me. "You didn't have to come." "I did," I said. "And I'll keep coming even after. She nodded as if we were speaking of the weather. "He looks like a man who keeps quiet too long." "Who?" "The one you're marrying." I blinked. "You've never even met him?" "No, but I've met that type before." Her eyes softened. "Your father had that same silence about him. Thought carrying the weight alone was noble until it nearly broke him. I don't know if Nathaniel has anything left to break. Then maybe he's waiting for someone to teach him how to heal." That afternoon, we sat in her hospital room while snowflakes dotted the window. She asked me about the Anderson estate, what it looked like. I described the long hallways, the smell of old wood, the way the chandeliers hummed faintly when no one was talking. She laughed. "Sounds lonely." "It is," I admitted, "but not empty." I paused. "No, not empty." That night, back at the Anderson house, I found Nathaniel in the study. He wasn't reading, just staring at a decanter of scotch on the table, untouched. "Is she all right?" he asked before I could say anything. "She's stable." I hesitated. "Thank you." He didn't respond, just nodded once. I stepped further into the room. The firelight cast shadows across the shelves, throwing golden curves over the edges of leather-bound books. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. "Pay for her care." "Yes," he said, still not looking at me. "I did." A beat. "My father used to say there are debts worth more than money." "I know," he said. I sat down across from him. There was a moment, brief but certain, when I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Regret? Maybe. Exhaustion? Absolutely. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because it wasn't about you." That stung more than I expected. "I mean," he corrected, "it wasn't a favor. It was a promise. One I made to myself the day I read your father's letter." He finally looked up at me. "I was 12. When your father pulled mine from that ravine. They said he would have frozen to death. And he never talked about it. Not once. I only found out after the funeral." I said nothing, just listened. I remember thinking how strange it was that two men from such different worlds could trust each other in a moment that mattered, and how little anyone talked about it afterward, like it was too sacred to touch. I nodded. "That sounds like my dad." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. The fire cracked behind him, the only sound between us. "I didn't expect you to come back today," he said finally. "Why?" "Because if I were you, I wouldn't have." I smiled gently. "You're not me." He studied me as if he hadn't quite decided whether that was a good thing. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I stayed in town once years ago. Drove past your father's shop." "Why?" He hesitated. "I think I wanted to see what the man who saved my father looked like, but I didn't go in. I didn't want to intrude." "You should have," I said. "He would have given you coffee and probably made you a vest without asking." Nathaniel's mouth twitched a near smile. "I wasn't ready," he admitted. "Are you now?" The question hung in the air, not demanding an answer, just asking to be heard. Later, as I walked to my room, I passed the grand hallway again. The air was still. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It felt watchful, like the walls were waiting. And for the first time since I arrived, I wondered what it would feel like to stay. Not because of duty, not even because of debt, but because I was starting to believe this house might have room for something new. Something like forgiveness or maybe even love. I didn't sleep much the night after I returned from the hospital. Not because of the silence. The Anderson estate had mastered silence deep, obedient, and polished. The kind that curled around you like a velvet curtain. No. What kept me up was the space Nathaniel left behind in the study. The kind that doesn't look like loneliness at first glance, just absence. Like someone had stepped out of the room and forgotten to return for years. That night, I dreamt of my father. He was younger, sitting at his work table, a half-finished coat on his lap. He looked up and said only one thing: "You don't fix fabric by stretching it. You fix it by finding where the thread first broke." I woke up before sunrise. The wedding was 4 days away. There were fittings, legal documents, a polite note from someone named Meredith Nathaniel's lawyer, or perhaps his assistant asking if I preferred pearls or diamonds for the ceremony. "Pearls," I wrote back, quiet, honest, not trying too hard. At breakfast, I found a linen napkin folded neatly on my plate. The kitchen was still. James poured coffee in silence. He never asked questions, just moved like a man trained to disappear between glances. "Where's Mr. Anderson?" I asked almost casually. "He's in the conservatory, miss," James said. "You'll find him with the flowers." I hadn't expected a conservatory, but when I stepped into it, the light hit me like memory, all warm and yellow, filtered through glass. It wasn't grand like the rest of the house. In fact, it felt lived in. There were pots everywhere, plants not trimmed to perfection, but growing in wild, honest ways, overwatered in places, forgotten others dot, and there he was. Nathaniel stood in front of a long workbench, shirt sleeves rolled, trimming the stems of a bouquet. Lavender dot. I stopped in the doorway, watched for a moment. "You grow these?" I asked finally. He turned, startled. "They were my mother's. She used to keep them in the kitchen." I stepped closer. We had them too in our backyard. My father always said lavender smelled like summer trying to stay. Nathaniel looked down at the flowers. Funny, my father hated the smell. Scent reminded him of weakness. I waited. Let the silence breathe between us, Dot, then he added quietly, "She planted them anyway." It was the first time I'd heard him speak of his mother. Something in his tone had shifted. Softer, yes, but also uncertain, like a man tiptoeing through a memory he hadn't visited in a long time. "She left when I was 10, he said. No goodbye. Just gone." I felt something catch in my chest, not pity. "Not exactly." "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded once, then returned to the bouquet. His hands, usually so precise, were clumsy today. He nicked his thumb on a thorn and didn't flinch. I moved closer, took the scissors gently from his hand, and wrapped a tissue around the cut. You don't have to bleed alone, I said, not really thinking. That made him look at me. Really? Look, I don't know how to do this, he said. This? I asked. Talk, share, feel any of it. And then, after a moment, a quiet so fragile I was afraid to breathe, he whispered, I'm sorry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it landed like an earthquake inside my ribs. I swallowed. For what? He blinked as if he hadn't realized he'd said it out loud. For the way I've handled this. You all of it. I agreed to it, I said softly. Yes, but that doesn't mean I've made it easy. He stepped back, gave me space, but his hands trembled now. Only slightly, but I saw it. My father taught me how to command, how to lead, how to win, but he never taught me how to care for someone. He taught you to survive, I said, not to. Stay. We stood there for a while among the lavender and the lingering scent of damp soil. There was something healing about that room, not in what it held, but in what it didn't try to be. He finally said, I booked the chapel because it's quiet. No press, no guests, just us. I nodded that double quotes. Do you want to cancel it? He asked. We still can. No one needs to know. No, I said. I want to go through with it, but I want something first. He looked up wary. Dinner, I said, in the formal dining room, a real one, you and me. No lawyers, no lists. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. A date, a beginning, I said. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. All right. That night, James lit the candles in the dining room. The chandelier glowed like soft fire. The table was long, but he only set 2 places close together. Nathaniel wore a navy suit, not his usual armor, something less rigid. His tie was crooked. You hate this, don't you? I asked as we sat. I don't know what to do with quiet rooms, he admitted. I do, I said. You listen to what isn't being said. We ate roast chicken and warm bread, talked about nothing at first books neither of us had finished, places we hadn't traveled to, but eventually the silence turned gentle, comfortable. And when the meal was over and we both lingered as if afraid to break the spell, he said something that stayed with me long after I went to bed. I don't know what love is supposed to look like, but I think it might look a little like this. Later, lying in bed, I didn't think about contracts or debts or promises made by men who were long gone. I thought about lavender and a man who didn't know how to stay, but stayed anyway. There's a certain kind of dusk that doesn't belong to any clock. The kind that slips into the sky like a sigh. Not quite day, not yet night, just stillness soft and suspended. That's the light we sat in when he finally let me in. The garden behind the Anderson estate was just beginning to wake after the long Vermont winter. The ground was still cold, but green had started to push through. Beneath the skeletal branches of climbing roses, Nathaniel had a table set up 2 chairs, a white linen cloth, and an awkward bouquet in the center, half tulips, half wildflowers that didn't quite match. I loved it immediately. Don't expect me to do this often, he said when I arrived. I don't usually dine with guests under my dead hedges. I'm not a guest, I said. I'm your wife almost. That made him pause. Then he motioned to the seat across from him. Dinner, he said simply. The food was warm and homemade, though not by his hands. James had prepared it, of course, but Nathaniel poured the wine, sliced the bread, and refilled my glass before I could ask. It was the first meal I'd had in months that didn't feel like a countdown. No appointments afterward, no lists, just slow eating and slower words. I used to dream about dinners like this, I said. Not the setting exactly, but the quiet, the togetherness. He tilted his head. You dreamed of marriage. I dreamed of having a place at a table. Not because I earned it, just because I was wanted there. He said nothing for a while. Then, you belong at every table you choose to sit at. There was a long pause, the kind that fills with more than air. And then, just as the wind shifted, he smiled. It was quick, barely there. But I saw it in the corner of his mouth, in the softening of his jaw. You smiled, I said before I could stop myself. No, he said too fast. I didn't. You did. He looked away, but the ghost of it lingered like he didn't quite know how to take it back. It wasn't intentional. That's the best kind. As the sky darkened to lavender, I found myself studying him the way I used to study sketches in my father's workshop, trying to understand the story behind the lines. His face didn't invite questions, but it didn't push them away anymore either. His posture wasn't defensive. It was unguarded, like a gate had been left slightly ajar. I used to think silence meant someone had nothing to say, I said. But lately, I think maybe it just means no one's been listening long enough. Nathaniel looked at me. The kind of look that strips a room of pretense. I was raised by a man who spoke only when it served him, he said, and by a world that rewards distance. Do you want something different? He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. After dessert, a pear tart, so delicately sliced it looked. Sculpted, he walked me back through the garden. The air had turned cooler, the kind of cool that crept into your sleeves and curled around your wrists. I shivered once. Without a word, he slipped off his blazer and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm, too large, and smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Thank you, I said. He nodded. You know, I added, this might be the first night since we met where neither of us mentioned the contract. Nathaniel slowed. Maybe that's a good sign. Maybe it means we're pretending well. Or maybe, he said quietly, it means we're not pretending anymore. Back at the house, he stopped at the base of the stairs. I expected him to disappear into the west wing where he usually vanished, but instead he lingered. There's something I want to give you, he said. He led me to the library. The fireplace was unlit. The room smelled like aged leather and pine. He'd crossed to a cabinet near the far wall and opened a drawer I hadn't noticed before. Inside, a small, velvet box. He handed it to me without ceremony. I opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, not the one from the contract that had been clinical, chosen by someone else. This one was different. Simpler, older. A thin gold band with a single rose-cut sapphire in the center, weathered but beautiful. It was my mother's. He said, she left it behind when she left. She always said if I ever found someone who stayed, I should give them something that did too. I didn't say anything. Words felt too small. Instead, I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, he said, not a breath of hesitation. That night, as I undressed in the quiet of my room, I held my hand to the light. The stone glinted not brightly, just enough, like it didn't need to shout to be seen. It didn't feel like ownership or debt or duty. It felt like being chosen. Maybe not in love, not yet, but in intention, in the soft, terrifying act of opening. One door and hoping someone stays. I slept easily for the first time in weeks. And in the hallway just outside my door, a man stood for several minutes before walking away. He never knocked, but he stayed long enough to try dot. It began with a letter not from Nathaniel, not even from the lawyer I'd spoken to about wedding logistics. This envelope arrived tucked between a breakfast menu and a note from James about the heating pipes. Plain ivory paper with an unfamiliar seal dot inside, it read, Miss Carter, your presence is requested at the Anderson Foundation meeting this Friday at 10 a.m. in the East Boardroom. This concerns estate planning and relevant heirs per the revised last will and testament of the late Mr. Henry Anderson. Meredith Langston, senior legal counsel. I blinked at the word heirs. I wasn't one. I wasn't even a wife, not yet. So what was I being asked to witness? When I brought the letter to Nathaniel, he didn't act surprised, just tired. Every few years, someone tries to claim a piece of the empire, he said. Usually around anniversaries or funerals. And now they think I'm vulnerable because I'm getting married. Because I'm not playing by the rules they expected. Who's they? He exhaled. My cousin Edward. He said the name like someone says the word splinter. Friday came wrapped in fog, the kind that made the entire estate look like it had been dipped in milk. I dressed carefully that morning, not to impress, but to protect. Long sleeves, high collar, my mother's brooch at the throat, a piece of her close to my heart. The east boardroom sat at the far end of the house. I'd never been in it. As James escorted me down the corridor, I noticed how much colder this part of the estate felt. Fewer paintings, no fresh flowers, just polished floors and formal silence. When we entered, I saw him instantly. Edward Anderson, mid-30s, handsome in a way that was too smooth. His smile never touched his eyes. Well, he said, standing to greet me. So this is the tailor's daughter? He didn't offer a handshake. I nodded once. And you must be the cousin who calls board. Meetings like family interventions. He tilted his head. Fairy, I like her already. The meeting began. Edward had brought a motion to review Henry Anderson's will and challenge a portion of Nathaniel's control over the estate. The reason? Marriage. Under dubious terms, Edward said, to a woman with no financial history, no social standing, and no proof of long-standing relationship with the heir. I sat frozen, my hands folded in my lap. I have no objection to love, he added with a smile. Like glass. But when a man weds his father's debtor's daughter weeks before gaining full control of a fortune, one must ask, who benefits? Nathaniel said nothing. He let Edward speak. Let the air grow thick with suspicion and innuendo until Edward turned to me directly and said, Tell me, Miss Carter, how long did you know Nathaniel before agreeing to become Mrs. Anderson? That's when Nathaniel stood. His chair scraped back against the hardwood like thunder in a quiet church. He walked forward slowly, placed both hands on the table, and said in a voice low, even, but sharp as frost, She doesn't owe you an explanation. Edward raised an eyebrow. I believe the board. She doesn't owe you anything, Nathaniel repeated. He straightened, buttoned his jacket, and looked around the room. Emma Carter is here because she is part of this family. Not by blood, but by choice. By legacy, my father trusted hers. I trust her. That is the only endorsement that matters in this house. Silence. Absolute. He didn't look at me as he left the room, but the sound of his defense echoed long after he was gone. When I found him hours later, he was in the stables brushing down. A horse with more care than he gave most people. You didn't have to do that, I said from the doorway. He didn't turn around. Yes, he said. I did. I stepped closer. The scent of hay and cedar filled the air. Warm, honest, like the barn's back. Home. You stood up for me. I